Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, June the 26th. At the time of speaking, there are 126 publicly confirmed rebels for the government's flagship welfare bill. And so in the last few hours, number 10 has confirmed it is rollback time. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Now, if this time yesterday, the government was telling me that it was ploughing on, that was the official line, with its welfare reforms, overnight, number 10 has confirmed it's now all up in the air again. I received a statement, and at 26 minutes past midnight, never quite the sign of a totally functioning government, from a number 10 source, which declared, "We want to get things right," and confirmed, "Of course, we are talking to colleagues," which is political code for we are going to have some concessions on this absolute nightmare of a welfare change that Keir Starmer is trying to push through.
And the number 10 source confirming there what ministers like Angela Rayner and Luke Pollard have been saying from tea time onwards yesterday, that meaningful talks are underway. It's striking. They called next Tuesday, the day of the supposed crunch vote on disability cuts, now as just the start. But the start of what? It's far from clear how much Chancellor Rachel Reeves is prepared to row back, because how much of the 5 billion she wants in savings is she prepared to forgo? And for a Prime Minister who described opposition this week as noises off, how does he climb down while saving face?
Noises off. You said that's this week. It was yesterday, right? That's how fast things are going.
That's true.
I suppose, in the words of one rebel, at least we should celebrate that this government is out of the denial phase, which it's been in for some time. But we don't know how far out. You know, as you say, I am told Rachel Reeves is definitely digging in to try and minimise the concessions, and therefore the latest, yet another black hole she'll have in the public finances. And so this is one really interesting dimension to what's going on at the moment. How powerful is Rachel Reeves? That's actually the essay question, one of the essay questions over the next few days. She commanded all that she surveyed back in the autumn and in the first few months of this government. This is all a very direct Exocet missile into her political authority, given that a lot of the welfare changes are things that she sort of leaned on Liz Kendall to do. So that is a big deal, because there's no point in her holding her ground if the government loses Tuesday's vote, which if all of those 126 rebels vote against the government, they will do. So it's tricky, because the rebels tell me that if they are going to bring down the size of the rebellion to something that's actually manageable, it's going to be very, very expensive. We can spell out exactly the things that you would need to do for rebels to cool off the horses. And inevitably, the top of government is deeply divided on this issue, and we'll have some of the fault lines in a moment.
And if that weren't enough, the scale of the crisis facing both the main parties is laid bare today with YouGov's first seat-by-seat polling projection of the new parliament. If Labour won a 172-seat majority at the last election, then YouGov now projecting it would not only lose its majority, falling from 403 seats to 178, but in doing so, it would become second largest party by some distance in a hung parliament in which, drumroll, Reform UK would be the largest force. So not exactly happy days are here again in number 10, is it?
No. Look, the obvious health warning, we are probably years from a general election. But it does, that kind of polling projection from YouGov, who did the gold standard in the general election last year, just pushes the kind of spectre in people's minds in Westminster of Nigel Farage being Prime Minister a little bit higher up the agenda. The Reform UK seat tally, by the way, Anne, goes from 5 seats, or there's 6 seats at the moment, to 271. And the Conservatives would go to a mere 46 seats. Boy. So decimation. So remember, that's a polling projection based on current polling numbers, so this is a judgment on Kemi Badenoch in part, 46 seats, that's the Tories as a governing force basically done. And it puts them fourth behind the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats get a further boost from their record highs. And actually there'd be a nationalist resurgence, an SNP resurgence north of the border in Scotland.
And Sir John Curtis, the veteran pollster and poll interpreter, saying he makes of it basically, Sam, that anyone who was a pro-Brexit voter who voted Tory in 2019 pretty much on this polling has gone reformwards. There, in a nutshell, is the challenge for Kemi Badenoch and those who are perhaps thinking about their own futures, fill in the usual names, who are thinking, well, do they stick with Kemi Badenoch or do they look for something else? But let's just focus on the government, because that's really where the pain point is, I think, going into this weekend and into that vote next week. It does feel like it's not just a moment. And of course, governments do have setbacks and they do have rebellions. But it's interesting to me that we've seen this move from the left of the party, the soft left of the party, this resistance to those disability and benefit cuts, rightwards in a kind of run towards the centre ground of Labour among MPs. I saw Politico Playbook reporting this morning, for instance, that Toby Perkins, who ran Liz Kendall's leadership campaign back when she ran from the right of the party in 2015, is now a signatory to those worried about the bill and asking for changes. That's the trouble, isn't it? If you're in Downing Street, there's a lot of noises. I was about to say noises off, but I think that's an unfortunate phrase in the circumstances, given the way it's rebounded on Keir Starmer, saying this is all the fault of number 10. This is mismanagement, not just, I don't like this, it doesn't fit my Labour values.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. This isn't the left or the soft left. This is bits of every faction, as you say. And it is... when that happens, it's much harder to win an ideological argument because you're not pitting two halves of the Labour Party, for instance, against one another. It is clearly a reaction at the entire political operation by number 10. I mean, they just look like a mess. What was striking yesterday was it was a day of two halves. In the morning, and up to lunchtime, we had Deputy Prime Minister's questions because Keir Starmer's in NATO, I think, heading back this morning. Angela Rayner was saying, we will go ahead. But then this new line from Tea Time, first Angela Rayner and then Luke Pollard to my colleague Sophie Ridge, both saying conversations with Labour MPs are underway, which is the code for concessions. So what's your read, Anne, on what next?
Well, the risks of just pressing on now are obvious. I think the sign of this number of prospective rebels caving in without concessions, that is not going to happen. And it seems, in terms of your 26 minutes past midnight message there that you were reading out, that number 10 now accept that this is not just noises off. It's not something with a few phone calls and a bit of a charm offensive. I was talking to other cabinet member and staffers last night. Basically, if you had calls yesterday with anyone who's working around the top cabinet team, you found that it would be put off for 8 hours because they were just working the phones the whole time. I mean, they'd been basically told to get behind the rescue plan. People like Wes Streeting are now playing quite a big role there, when actually I think they wanted to be talking about other things this week. So what have we gathered? Well, I think that it is that PIP, the personal independence payment for those deemed long-term sick and unable to work, that is really at the heart of the rebellion. There are other bits of it that people don't like, but that, I think, is where the climb down is going to have to come in some form or something to mitigate what is seen as the unfair impacts of that. And some unintentional ones. And just looking at the line that Unison, the union Unison, is taking based on its polling, and it's a big poll that they conducted, of the impact on workers with disabilities. I think it is true that we're sometimes guilty of saying, well, this is all about getting people who are not working and have not worked for a long time back to work. And that is the government's intention. But it also does, I think, unintentionally hit those who rely on PIP, who have disability, in order to facilitate them continuing to work and maybe working in lower paid jobs or not working so many hours, but they are then affected by it. Clive Lewis hosted an event with Unison a couple of days ago to amp up that point. And I think that these are the areas that MPs are telling me they spend an inordinate amount of time on, when the government is saying, well, this is clear, we need to do it. to help people, to make them more self-reliant. The bees are just hearing that it has too many consequences that maybe have not been thought through.
That's right. So I've been talking to the rebels about exactly what the concessions around PIP might have to look like. And my goodness, Anne, the big point is that they want costly concessions. And remember, it was only a few days ago that the government already tried to compromise. That was about a week ago, and that was on the kind of transitional arrangements, how we move from the old system of PIP assessment to the new one, or the sort of introduction of the higher bar in order to be able to claim. And I'm told that went down so badly because no one was asking for that it actually fueled the rebellion. So get this wrong at this stage, and you'll be cut no slack by the Parliamentary Labour Party. So there are two big things. Now, the system of personal independent payments, in order to get it, you have to qualify by being, and the language around this is tricky. It's sort of, you need to be able to show that you qualify by being unable to do certain tasks. It's a points-based system. And essentially what the government was proposing was that you needed to score a minimum of 4 points on at least one daily living activity to be eligible for the daily living element of this. That is hard, right? That makes claiming PIP a lot harder. So the first big concession is to sort of get rid of that change, right? The second big concession is that they want to delay it in a way that Rachel Reeves will find difficult in her accounting because she's already banked the savings from this. But the problem is that the government's argument is that we will not see a lot of disabled people pushed into poverty, as the government's own impact assessment said, because there will be lots of support to get people back into work who are disabled. But the problem is that support doesn't come until much later. And so the rebels are saying, well, flip it, bring forward the date at which you bring in the employment support, or better, delay the commencement date so this plan doesn't come in effectively next year. And that, again, messes up Rachel Reeves' accounting. But they're going to have to swallow in Downing Street, or force Rachel Reeves to swallow in number 11, these sorts of concessions if they've got any hope of bringing it below 50. Bring the rebellion below 50. I'm told they're probably likely to be 50 rebels come what may, 35 from the Socialist Campaign Group, and 15 new intake Labour MPs who are just so cross at the whole thing that they're going to go for the government. But of course, that would be a win if it ended up with a sort of rebel tally of 50, because it's below the critical 83 that would defeat the government.
The problem with what you outline there, it's really good and interesting to have those numbers on the table. But when we talk about delaying it or sequencing it differently, I think this just extends a kind of running story. It becomes a running saw for Keir Starmer and for Rachel Reeves, doesn't it? The chances there of tension rising between Prime Minister and Chancellor as they try to affect what you describe is the way out of it, probably, but it will not happen without damage already to their brand, their declared brand of being prepared to take tough decisions. So either they're kind of saying, well, we tried to take a tough decision and there was too much pushback, so we've had to make it a bit less tough, or we've had to push it back. I'm reminded of negotiating sometimes with my delightful teenagers. It was like, yeah, I'm never going to give in on this. Oh, well, all right then. So that's one aspect. And the other one is, it's effectively admitting that they got the sequencing wrong. I think you're right that that's the landing zone of the compromise, which doesn't then mean that you have to completely back off the principle, which I think really could be the kind of game over for this government. But then you have to accept, or they have to accept, that they got the sequencing wrong of how this PIP matter was to be dealt with, and that's quite a big competence miscalculation. Do we remember that this was a government that came in saying the Tories were so incompetent, you'll be so relieved when you've got us instead? Difficult, I think, for Liz Kendall, who has to front this one up, because at some point, I do feel that someone is going to have to take the fall for what is happening here. Now, Sam, is it the way I'm describing it, it's in those ministerial ranks, or is it behind that shiny black door in Downing Street?
Well, what's really interesting, let me pick up on the Liz Kendall point that you just made, is that the rebels don't blame Liz Kendall, they blame Rachel Reeves. Now, what I'm about to tell you, I haven't bothered to ask Liz Kendall's team because they will deny it, because they have to deny it. But what the rebels say, and the rebels' view is actually more important than Liz Kendall's team on this, is that whenever Liz Kendall appears before the Parliamentary Labour Party, there's always a wink and a nod. she always effectively, and I don't know exactly how she does it, but they come away with the feeling that she's loyal, yes, but she lays at the door of Rachel Reeves, they feel, says that is the reason that she's having to do things, effectively implying that she's not 100% sort of comfortable with. And one rebel said to me, Liz Kendall does it in a way that other cabinet ministers don't when they lose a battle with the Treasury. You just know this isn't Liz Kendall's plan from scratch. And that is interesting messaging and will no doubt feed some of the tensions at the top. But there's another dimension to this. And we are learning a lot about what's going on in number 10 at the moment. And the kind of dynamics there are shifting again. If you remember, it was just in the autumn that Sue Gray was ousted and Morgan McSweeney was appointed chief of staff and basically king of all that he surveyed. Advisors being terribly important in Keir Starmer's government because nobody really goes around talking about what Keir Starmer thinks. They often talk about what the aides think because Keir Starmer lands where the bulk of opinion of his aides does. Now, there's a lot of talk in the papers that Morgan McSweeney didn't listen early enough to some of the criticism on this and maybe misguided in pointing the finger at the whips. I don't know whether he did or whether he didn't for the political handling on that. But I think it's more complicated by that, and it's coming down to a bit of a battle of the advisors about where we go next. Rebels tell me that Morgan McSweeney now sounds like he's a sort of force for compromising. He is pushing to talking to rebels directly and pushing for the policy to evolve. But there's another faction in number 10, a faction that we don't talk about that much, and it's the one sort of led by the newer political policy chief, who's called Liz Lloyd. Now, she is a big figure from the Tony Blair era. And her power, I'm told, inside number 10 is growing and growing and growing. And she's, if not completely hardline, like insistent they press on, she is just a tougher character in this debate. She is less, the rebels think that she has been much less willing to listen and to compromise than Morgan. And that's, I think, where you start to get to the rumour put about by the Times that of Morgan McSweeney being sidelined or losing influence. And I think it is because suddenly there's another big beast on the block in Downing Street in the form of Liz Lloyd. And with the best will in the world, Morgan McSweeney isn't massively a details policy person. He's politics. That's Liz Lloyd's strength. And now I think that those two things are butting up on against each other. Morgan McSweeney, not the only big kid on the block behind the big black door. What do you make of that, Anne?
I make of that as you describe it. A little bit of detail if you just like to fill out the colour around Liz Lloyd. Let's remind ourselves why she came into number 10 in the first place. Deputy Chief of Staff to Tony Blair when Jonathan Powell was Chief of Staff. Jonathan tended to deal with bigger picture issues. That means she's a very details person, as you point out. She's used to driving the bus and to getting policy changes through. The job she came in to do was described as policy delivery and innovation. It wasn't just, number 10 policy unit, come up with some good stuff and hope it happens. When she feels frustrated about that, she's a very driven person, very clear, then she will make that felt. And she will also be trying to build a machine to do so. And if those two aims don't work well together, then yes, there will be tension. So I read it not so much as that she'd have gone in to have a row with Morgan McSweeney, or that it's a turf war in the sort of slightly trivial sense. I mean that if Liz Lloyd feels she cannot get her business done, and she has, after all, given up she had various jobs in sort of private sector and public-private sort of combined, there are other things she can do. She does not need to be there. She's not a party animal in that sense. So she really wants to get stuff done. And I think she will be cautious about backing off too far on these reforms.
Fascinating. I just want to update with one thing on a slightly different subject that is fascinating to me. We're talking about advisors and the roles of civil servants and the people around the politicians. Big grumpy blog today from the Institute for Government, because this government has banned all officials from speaking in public. They're not allowed anymore to take part in question and answer sessions where the media might attend, and the Institute for Government's come out and said that that's wrong. So at the point at which 1,000 flowers must bloom in the political debate, there is an attempt to silence people in all around Whitehall from having a voice in any of it. I'm not sure they're going to particularly help themselves by doing that, but let's see.
Now, Sam, you're at the heart of the political action, as always, but not in Westminster. So I'm going to reveal a secret. You've left London.
Try to avoid that.
So I'm going to force you to admit where you are.
Oh, God. Well, thank you very much indeed, Anne. I am in a place that probably inspires love and hatred in equal measure. I am down in Somerset for the world's largest arts and cultural festival. Yes, I'm actually in Glastonbury town. I'm not allowed to do this podcast from the Glastonbury Festival because of the very strict rules, but I'm down here in Somerset. Partly for fun, let's be honest. But I do think that Glastonbury is one of those incredible moments where it just finds a way of being at the heart of the political debate in key moments. In 2016, I think there was a very particular mood. I was told I wasn't there that year. Post the Brexit referendum, I think it's fair to say most people at the festival lean the other way. In 2017, of course, it was almost as if Jeremy Corbyn had won the election that he lost because he appeared on stage with thousands of people shouting, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn." It was a sort of emblem during COVID. The politics this year is, I was walking around, it's quite fascinating. There's sort of friends of the festival, figures like Dale Vince, the sort of left-wing Labour donor. And it's sort of so eco-left as its politics. What's really striking, though, is it's not Keir-friendly. There is a big display led by donkeys in one of the areas called Block 9, and it's just got a whole list of enemies of this festival. And some of them are completely unsurprising. That they're targeting the tech bros, for instance. So Donald Trump, alongside Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, and Benjamin Netanyahu, and Liz Truss and Prince Andrew, and Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, and JD Vance. So those aren't surprising. But then we get into the sort of the UK political names, the enemies. Suella Braverman. Boris Johnson, okay, I can see that.
Same as it ever was.
Keir Starmer's in the list of political enemies of Glastonbury, and then Nick Clegg and J.K. Rowling. So a sort of surprising spread. You can see how they've perhaps come to that, but I'm not sure widespread agreement. Anyway, that is the political vibe of what's going on down here in Somerset.
You are so down with the kids. But I think I'm going to end with a couple of songs that popped into my head when you were chatting there that might sum up the political environment. Listeners can let us know theirs if they have them. I think I'm going with Shipbuilding from Elvis Costello for the fraught international situation. Is it Tom Petty, I Won't Back Down, for Keir Starmer, maybe? Or has that got a B-side, I'm Losing You, which I think is John Lennon? What do you reckon?
Alanis Morissette is performing on Friday, and Ironic, I think, just sums up pretty much everything to do with the political scene. We will be back on Monday, I promise, at 6:40 in the morning for the recording, come what may and whatever happens this weekend. That is my pledge to you, and I have no intention of rowing back, however fun, the weekend ahead. So I will see you then.
Have a blastic blasto. See you Monday.